Welcome to California Now, a podcast produced by Visit California. I'm your host, Soterios Johnson. Join us as we explore 3 unique destinations that help make California such a special place to visit. Today, we'll join celebrity chef Curtis Stone on a culinary tour of California's Central Coast. Stone's team at his Beverly Hills restaurant Maude ventured north from LA to find inspiration for a new menu, and they struck pay dirt.
We literally sat out on the water on a barge drinking wine with these incredible oysters, and then your mind starts wandering and you think, well, if we can't bring our guests out here, how do we bring this to them?
Also, Olympic gold medalist Jonny Moseley spent countless hours training at Squaw Valley Ski Resort. They even named a run after him. He'll share a few of his favorite activities in the Lake Tahoe area.
Well, if you get access to someone's boat, water skiing out there first thing in the morning is an experience. It feels a little crisp when you get in, but man, it's a day maker.
Plus, we'll talk with author Matt Jaffe, an outdoorsman who's crafted a lively itinerary in Death Valley National Park. It's all coming up on California Now. This is California Now, a podcast produced by Visit California. Our mission is to introduce you to some of the people and places that make the Golden State such a great place to visit. Our hope is that you'll hear something that inspires you to plan a California adventure of your own. My next guest is a familiar face to anyone who watches cooking shows on television. Curtis Stone is an accomplished chef who first rose to prominence while working with Marco Pierre White in London. Curtis was soon pegged as a camera-friendly TV personality and has since appeared on The Today Show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, as well as many food-focused programs like Top Chef Masters and Master Chef. He runs the kitchens of 2 Los Angeles restaurants, Gwen and Maude, and he's joining us now from Gwen. Welcome, Curtis.
How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. So, I feel like I know you from your various TV appearances, and I imagine a lot of people feel the same way, but what many people probably don't know is that you run these 2 restaurants in LA. They're named after your grandmothers, and they're both very distinct. Let's start with Gwen. Can you tell us about her and it?
Certainly. Well, Gwen was my mum's mum, my nan. She grew up in rural Victoria and was a big influence on my life, and I named my second restaurant after her, so it's called Gwen, of course. We're here on Sunset Boulevard, just on the corner of Seward, right in the middle of Hollywood. And the idea for the restaurant is it's a butcher shop, first and foremost. That's kind of the heartbeat of the building. You walk in, whether you come into the shop or whether you come into the restaurant, you walk in through an old school kind of European style butcher shop. We do whole animal butchery, we make all our own charcuterie, and we buy the best of the best stuff from Wagyu from Australia, and incredible things locally as well. And then you walk through, if you're here for the restaurant, you walk through the butcher shop and into the dining room, and the restaurant is a beautiful big old fire-centric. Everything's cooked over a fire in the dining room, and it's it's not a steakhouse, but I guess that's the closest parallel that you could pull. Meat-centric restaurant.
Sounds great. So let's talk a little bit about your other restaurant, Maude. Maude recently underwent some big changes. Wine pairings are now a big part of the focus at that restaurant now, right?
Yeah, so Maude's a 24-seat dining room. It's in Beverly Hills on South Beverly Boulevard. South Beverly Drive. And we, I should know where it is. I drive there every day. And we, it's been, a fun little restaurant. The idea of it initially was to start with 1 ingredient per month. We'd develop a 10-course tasting menu out of that 1 ingredient. And we'd try and show off the ingredient in all of its glory. We'd use the seeds and the blossom and the roots and the stems, and we'd really drill down onto that ingredient and try and show it in a lot of different forms. And so that was the idea. We ran with it for 4 years. It was, a very successful restaurant. It got voted LA's best restaurant at one point by LA Weekly. We're very proud of it. And 4 years in, we just sort of decided it was time for a change, and why the wine pairings had been a really big part of the restaurant. So we thought, let's focus on wine regions, and we basically switched an ingredient, some kind of produce like a beet, for instance, for a wine region. So we started, the first menu was done in Rioja, the second in Burgundy, and the third Central Coast of California. And the idea effectively is we take a small group of the team and we go there and we get inspired by the food and the wine and the history and the culture, and we try and come up with a 10-course tasting menu that typifies what that region's got to offer.
That sounds great. And also the fact that you're able to actually travel and maybe have to travel to those places to conduct your research on the food and wine. Sounds like a really great way to bring that stuff to your restaurant.
My wife always says as I leave for these trips, enjoy your research, as she puts her fingers up in inverted commas. And she's right. It is. It's a very fun way to do some research, but I think you've got to enjoy your job, and you should really get a lot out of it, and it should give you a lot, as much as you give it. And cooking's given me so much, and I think that constant travel, that constant learning is sort of what's always kept me really on the edge of my seat, inspired. So it's nice to share that with some of the team now and be doing these trips with them, and the results have been pretty cool so far.
So when you were going on this research trip along the central coast of California, take us along for a moment. What were some of the highlights as you kind of tasted your way north?
The Santa Barbara and beyond area of the Central Coast is literally in our backyard, and we get a lot of ingredients from there. And of course, they've gone through some hard times over the last 12 months. They had fires and they had mudslides, and there's a lot of disturbance to that region. And if you can imagine, to our friends who run restaurants and hotels and bars and the like in the hospitality business up there, they've been really suffering. So we sort of thought, why not focus on an area that we know and love? We've been using wines and ingredients from there for some years. So let's turn our attention there. And we really started our trip, I guess, in Santa Barbara, which is one of my favorite places to go for a weekend. But there's so much beautiful stuff that not only comes out of the local farms and produce that comes out of there, but also out of the ocean. So we started off there with this incredible woman named Stephanie, who's actually an uni diver. She goes out for urchins every morning, and we started by meeting her on her boat and cracking open sea urchins and eating them straight out of the shell, which was a pretty beautiful way to begin.
I'm sure you've used uni before and oysters before, but actually seeing how they're produced and where they're harvested, how they're harvested, really makes a difference.
It sure does. And meeting the locals that have such passion around it. And in fact, it's helped us to sort of shape the menu, because as a chef, you quite often start with an ingredient and you want to show off the technique that you've learned as a chef. You think to yourself, what can I do with this ingredient? And in some cases, the answer should be nothing. You should do nothing. You should just buy it in its freshest, rawest, most beautiful form and serve it just that way. It made us sort of stop and think, eating uni on the water and, shucking oysters out on the oyster bay. And you sort of think, God, if only we could do this for our guest, because some of the wine team that day had been out and found some incredible rosés, and they brought the rosés to us. They joined us at the oyster farm, and we literally sat out on the water on a barge, drinking wine, drinking different types of rosé with these incredible oysters. And then your mind starts wandering. You think, well, if we can't bring our guests out here, how do we bring this to them? And
right.
I think what we'll end up doing is, when the guests arrive, we'll sort of show them some of the incredible seafood in its rawest form, literally open to order, whether that be the oysters and the uni or the crab, that even the mussels that we sort of found along the way. And then further into the menu, we'll cook with it, and we'll sort of see whether we can do something as beautiful as just opening it natural. So you'll get to sort of see the shellfish in a few different ways.
That sounds amazing. All right, let's keep going. I'm guessing you visited a few farms along the way.
We sure did. But then the next stop that really caught my eye, I suppose, was the creamery that we went to. It's called Stepladder Creamery, a little further up into the Central Coast. And Santa Ynez, sort of Paso Robles, I guess, was that sort of leg of the drive. We stopped at this ranch, Stepladder, and we had a couple, Jack and Michelle, who decided to throw in, I think they're in the tech world, but whatever industry they were sort of working away at before, they decided to throw it all in and go and milk some goats. And it's pretty interesting. I often joke with my wife when things get a bit chaotic in my life. I'm like, that's it. I'm moving to the country and I'm milking a bloody goat, because I feel like that would be, the ideal way of life. And it was pretty cool meeting with these guys, because they've done just that, and they have pigs and they have cattle and they have goats, of course. They milk the goats each morning. They turn it into this incredible goat's cheese that they're producing there. So it was really cool spending a day with them, watching that whole process, understanding how they're making the cheese, and just sort of just seeing how diverse this landscape really is. That morning we were on the water, like I said, out in an oyster bay, and then a little bit later on that afternoon you're in, pretty thick sort of country where there's these, beautiful grazers doing incredible work. So that was our next stop.
Did anything surprise you about your road trip? I mean, did you learn about a product you thought you knew, but maybe you really didn't know that well?
Look, I think what was so interesting was the culture of California, and being in LA, you can forget. You feel like you're well and truly in California, which of course you are, but you only have to drive an hour north to sort of rediscover the Californian culture that's still alive and well. And there's this kind of easygoing, hippie-esque kind of attitude towards life, and whether it's a couple that run off and milk goats for a living, or meeting people on the ocean that have sort of a bit of a surfy vibe. I love that.
It sounds like with this trip you've successfully merged your work with something the rest of us would call fun. I mean, did you gain a newfound appreciation for the Central Coast?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's such a beautiful... I've always known the Central Coast as a good place to surf and lay in the sun and hang out and get a good bite to eat, But when you get up there and sort of dig into the cuisine and the culture of the region a little more, it blows you away. It's just such a beautiful place to be. And, you're absolutely right. I guess I have found a way to... make my work my fun, or make my fun my work. But it's a pretty incredible place to do it, and it's just the variety of stuff that's on offer is really unbelievable. The most beautiful countryside, followed by gorgeous coastal regions.
Well, it's amazing. It's so great to be able to kind of take the bounty of what's nearby and in your backyard and be able to bring it to your restaurant.
It really is, and I think that's the one thing that stood out to us that we're maybe underplaying a little bit from that Central Coast is just how fantastic the shellfish is. This menu is invariably going to end up close to pescatarian. We might have one meat course out of the 10, but for the most part, you just can't not use all of this beautiful shellfish that's right on your doorstep. We went to a mussel farm, and we'll be just certainly showcasing those. So yeah, just so many amazing things to show.
All right, we've been talking about food mostly so far, but wine pairing is key to the concept you're following at Maude. What were some of the key takeaways you found? In other words, what will we be drinking when we stop by, Curtis?
In the Central Coast, goodness me, there's so many different varietals grown. So, from sparkling wine that's made out of Chardonnay grapes, and right through, of course, to Chardonnays and Pinots that the regions are well known for, but they're also growing Cabernet and Syrah in the same region. So we got to visit a variety of different places. Some that are making things a little bit more in a European style, and some in a very progressive new way. So from the places that we stopped off down in I know I'm going to pronounce this terribly, but in Santa Barbara we stopped at a place called Arbonne Climat, which fantastic wines. We moved further up the coast, and goodness, I'm trying to think. There was so much that we saw, and so many different places that we just loved. But I guess the idea of the Central Coast is you're going to see lots of variety, and I always say to people that come along to these dinners, you can take it really educationally, and you can sit there and you can learn a lot if you want to. We've got amazing sommeliers and wine directors that have dedicated their life to the grape juice, and that, they're happy to talk about it all night long. But you also don't have to think too much if you don't want to. You can just sort of come in, and we've done all the work for you. We've found wines that work perfectly with the dishes that we've created, and you can sort of just sit back and let it all just roll over nice and easily.
That's great. I know there's this expression, if it grows together, it goes together. Is that true? Is there a trick to wine pairing? I mean, how do you know when you've really nailed it?
Look, my attitude is there's no rules, and there should not be. And just like when you're in a kitchen, you think about a dish and a dish is only made up of ingredients. And to me, your wine and your food, they go harmoniously together. And that's when you think about them as ingredients. What's going to work well together? That idea of if it grows together, it goes together. It's a good one, and it's usually it usually makes sense. We were lucky enough to be invited up to Mount Eden Vineyard with Jeffrey Patterson, who hosted us up there, and he said, "You've got to come up for a walk up onto this mountain." We walked up, and you could see all the way down to the ocean. And we'd been to the abalone farm in Monterey that morning, and we said, well, we should have a little barbecue and cook you some abalone to say thanks for having us up here. And he said, I've got a wine that I think might work with that. And we went and opened a bunch of the Chardonnays that he had, and we cooked abalone and seaweed on a little grill up on this mountaintop. And it's so idyllic and fantastic. But it turns out that wine worked really, really well with that abalone. And to your point, they're grown, 10 miles from one another. So it's pretty cool.
Well, I think I need to conduct some research of my own at your restaurant. Speaking of which, how does all of this research manifest itself on the plate? I mean, what are a few of the spotlight dishes visitors tend to love the most?
There's a rock crab dish that people are really loving. There's a squid dish that everybody that's had so far loves, and that's with some chilies. We found these incredible chilies when we were up there. Of course, everything grows well in California, but as we move into summer, chili's one of those real, fantastic ingredients. So we've made a fermentation out of some of the local chilies and smoked it. So we'll be cooking the squid, this baby squid, whole over a bichitong grill, which is a certain type of charcoal, and the smokiness of the squid, but also the delicate nature of that squid goes really well with the chilies too. So I think that's a dish that everyone's really enjoying.
Sounds amazing. All right, so before we let you go, Curtis, we have to know, how is the quarterly wine pairing concept working out? Is this something you plan to keep doing in the months ahead, or is there something new on the horizon?
Look, we're really enjoying it. We sort of said at the start of the year we'll commit to doing 4 menus like this. This is our 3rd. We're really enjoying it. I'm not 100% sure whether we'll be able to keep going or not, but look, I hope so. I think the guests are really loving it, and everybody that's coming in is enjoying it, whether you're a wine collector or an aficionado who wants to come in for that experience, or if you're just dipping your toe into the water. It seems to be working for everybody that comes in. Of course, there's no need to do there's no necessity to do the wine pairing either. You can come in and not drink wine at all and just sort of see the expression of the region from a culinary perspective. So it's good. It's been a busy year, and we're really happy. So fingers crossed we get to do it all again next year.
Well, it sounds like a delicious and great idea. Thanks so much, Curtis.
My pleasure. Lovely chatting to you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. You can sample Curtis Stone's fine dining cuisine at his 2 Los Angeles County restaurants, Gwen and Maude. And you can find links to the reservation desk and everything we talked about today at visitcalifornia.com/podcast. You're listening to the California Now podcast. I'm Soterios Johnson. Jonny Moseley was born in Puerto Rico, grew up in Marin County, won an Olympic gold medal in Nagano, Japan, and hosted Saturday Night Live in New York City. But today, we want to talk to him about another destination, Lake Tahoe. Welcome to the California Now podcast, Jonny.
Thank you, Soterios. Great to be here.
So, this segment is called the Lightning Round, so I'm going to toss a bunch of rapid-fire questions your way, and you should feel free to answer them like somebody is chasing you down the hill, okay?
All right. Let me get ready here, though. I got to do a couple push-ups because it sounds like I'm about to compete in something.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. What's your favorite place to ski in the area?
Oh, I'm a Squaw Valley guy all the way. That's where I grew up skiing, and that's where my favorite run is. It happens to be named after me, Jonny Moseley's run, and I can just do nonstop laps on that all day.
All right, let's change seasons now. The snow is melted. It's a beautiful day, and you want to be outside. Where are you going, and what are you doing?
I am going for a dip in the lake. I mean, that is the fountain of youth, Lake Tahoe. You get in there, and you feel rejuvenated.
What about something for the kids?
One of the things my kids look forward to every year is the Truckee Bike Park. This is so cool. It's kind of a community effort, and they have a pump track there and jumps if you want to get after it, and BMX. We hit that thing at least a couple times this summer.
And something your wife loves in the area.
One of the things that people forget about in Tahoe is Donner Lake. Oh man, this is like next level crispness. This is the lake my wife really likes. And there's these piers you can drive up and just pull over and run out on the pier and jump in and come right back. These public piers, like, it's so easy to access. I will often be driving back from, home to the Bay Area on a hot day. I'll just yank over, go for a dip, and get back in the car in like 10 minutes. So awesome.
How about a family-friendly activity?
One of my favorite things to do when the snow melts in Squaw is hike up Shirley Canyon and bring a little fishing pole. And there's a little lake in the top, and you can actually get trout in there, believe it or not.
What about on Lake Tahoe itself? What's your favorite thing to do on the water?
Well, I mean, if you get access to someone's boat, water skiing out there first thing in the morning is an experience. It feels a little crisp when you get in, but man, it's a day maker. So that's my favorite thing to do out there is water ski and wakeboard.
All right, and one more. Looking across this entire region, tell us about a hidden gem that people should know about but don't.
There is a specific hike in Bliss State Park that takes you along the shore and down into Emerald Bay. It is magical. You have to do it. And when you get down to Emerald Bay, you can jump in the water and swim out. Last time there was like a broken log out there, and we climbed up to the top of it and tried to jump off it. I belly flopped trying to do a backflip, which was hilarious for my kids, but it's you can't miss it. DL Bliss State Park, the hike along the lake down to Emerald Bay, amazing.
All right, you crushed it, Jonny. If I could bestow you with a gold medal for podcast interviews, I would.
Yes! I haven't won anything in a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonny Moseley is an Olympic gold medal skier and the star of Jonny Moseley's Wildest Dreams, a video series that has him traveling across California and trying all sorts of high adrenaline activities. You can find links to Wildest Dreams and to all the places he discussed today at visitcalifornia.com/podcast. You're listening to California Now. My next guest has spent a lot of time in a part of California that has an almost mythological status, Death Valley National Park. Everything about this region is extreme. The park covers 3.3 million acres and is bigger than any other national park in the lower 48. It's also the hottest and driest place in America, with summer temperatures peaking north of 120 degrees. The average rainfall is just 2 inches per year, and yet author Matt Jaffe swears that Death Valley is a fantastic place to visit. Matt, welcome to the California Now podcast.
Thank you.
You've traveled extensively in and around Death Valley, so tell us, what makes this seemingly inhospitable place worth a visit?
Well, I think the main thing about Death Valley is its openness and bigness, for lack of a better word. Because Death Valley is one of those places that really reorients your sense of what the world's about. I know that sounds a bit grandiose, but it is true. Especially when you're coming from a major city like Los Angeles and you get out into this really vast expanse, and with huge skies, towering mountains, salt flats, you name it. There's a real feeling of liberation, where you're kind of reminded just how big the world really is.
All right, I buy that. So your mission today is to help us hack Death Valley. By the time our conversation is over, our listeners should have enough information to begin planning a trip of their own. So are you up for the challenge?
I am.
Okay, great. Let's start with a bit of geography. I feel like I know where Death Valley is on a map generally, but how remote is it? Like, how long does it take to get there from, say, Los Angeles?
You can get to Death Valley in under 5 hours, and it's actually a pretty easy drive from LA. It's northeast of the city. You basically shoot up State Highway 14 and take a few more roads, and again, it's an easy drive, and it's a spectacular drive too, because one of the things I find remarkable about California, and especially Southern California, is how quickly you can get out of the city and just be into a very different world.
It sounds like actually just getting to the park makes for a great road trip.
Oh yeah, it's a terrific road trip. You're not on any kind of major freeways once you're outside the LA area. It's much more 2-lane roads, very drivable roads. Nothing too hectic, and again, just beautiful scenery, Joshua trees in some places, some spectacular views along the way.
I imagine there are certain times of the year you'd want to go to Death Valley, and other times when you might want to steer clear. When do you think is the best time to go?
I would say the best time to go is between November and into April. You might get October's not a bad month either, but it's remarkable because you hear the name Death Valley and you just think it's going to be scorching hot. But during the late fall, winter, and early spring months, weather conditions are almost perfect. And in fact, it can almost be cold at night. And the other thing, though, is that for a lot of people, the time to go is during the summer, which really sounds kind of crazy
right.
Considering that most days it goes over 120 degrees. But there's when you go out there, you're always going to be surrounded by Europeans because for them, it becomes this point of pride to have gone out to the hottest place on Earth because Death Valley has the hottest temperature ever recorded anywhere on Earth, which I think was 134 degrees.
Wow. All right, so help us build an itinerary. We drive to Death Valley. We show up on a relatively cool, say, winter day. What should we do first?
The classic thing to do in Death Valley is to wake up before dawn and to go over to Zabriskie Point, which is really just a couple miles from the main area where you would stay there. Zabriskie Point is famous for as the sun comes up, it begins to light up the Badland formations right below the point, particularly this one kind of triangular outcropping called Manly Beacon. And it's just remarkable to watch the change in color as the sun comes up higher. And then the other thing that's happening is that the Panamint Mountains on the other side of the valley begin lighting up. And whereas the foreground is going to be all kind of golds and yellows, the Panamint Mountains are going to take on kind of a pinkish purple cast. And that really is kind of the definitive morning experience in Death Valley. And there are going to be a lot of people out there, but even though it's not necessarily an experience of solitude, you're going to be blown away.
Yeah, it's not something you see every day, right?
No, definitely not. And it's a great photographic challenge too to just get that great moment. And then right by there's a very easy dirt road that explores another area of Badlands in 20 Mule Team Canyon. And it only goes on for about 3 miles, but it's kind of nice to get out in the middle of some of these formations as opposed to just see them from a distance. And that you can do in maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So before you've even had breakfast, you've had 2 really great experiences.
Being that it's a remote place, are there hotels in Death Valley? I mean, where do you eat? Where do you sleep?
There are a limited number, but there are a couple very special places you can stay. One of which is the Inn at Death Valley, which goes back to 1927. It's a luxury hotel, which you don't expect in Death Valley. I think most people just assume you're going to be camping or,
right.
Staying in a very basic motel. But the Inn at Death Valley was recently redone. It had a multi-million-dollar renovation, which was probably the biggest change there in a number of decades. And it's kind of this Mediterranean mission-style inn. It's literally an oasis because it's fed by water from a natural spring. That's what they use for their water supplies. There's a pool that is a steady somewhere between 82, 85 degrees because, it's fed directly from the spring.
Right, just naturally that warm.
Yeah. And the inn has an outstanding restaurant that really tries to emphasize desert-type ingredients, dates and pomegranates and things like that. and there's a spa there. So you're doing anything but roughing it.
All right, so, okay, let's say it's day 2 in Death Valley. What's on our to-do list?
Well, I'm going to tell people to wake up early again. And one of my favorite spots is there's an expanse of sand dunes near Stovepipe Wells, which is another area where there are hotels and restaurants. There's an area called Mesquite Flat Sand Dunes. They're not particularly tall. I think the tallest dunes are about 100 feet, although in the northern part of Death Valley, there's an area called Eureka Dunes, which are, I believe, the highest sand dunes in the country. But what's nice about the Mesquite Flat Sand Dunes is you can go out, and especially early in the morning, you can track the activity from the night before, because there are often coyote tracks and other animals that, because the winds haven't picked up yet, the tracks are still clearly visible in the sand. And it's very interesting because people think of Death Valley as being lifeless, but there are a number of mammal species. There are a fair number of birds, not surprisingly a lot of lizards, and there are even fish in Death Valley. There are these tiny little fish called desert pupfish, but there's a very easy trail that follows a boardwalk at the Salt Creek Interpretive Trail, and that's not too far away from the sand dunes. And you walk out there, it's a desert salt marsh, and if you look into some of the areas where there's free-flowing water year-round, you can see these tiny little fish called desert pupfish, and I think around March, they're very active because that's like the mating season, and you can see the males defending territory and chasing after the females, and it's kind of a miracle in a way when you think about how hot and dry Death Valley is, that you have these native fish living out there.
Yeah. I'm guessing we have time for, say, one more stop before we head back to L.A. and civilization. So what's the last best thing to see before we leave?
Oh, it's hard to make a choice, but one of my favorite places in the park, and this is a little bit of a drive going north, more into the northern reaches of the park, there's a spot called Ubehebe Crater, and that's the crater of a volcano that erupted about 2,100 years ago, and it's pretty huge. It was originally about 800 feet deep, but it's been filled in partway with debris over the years, so now it's about 600 feet deep. But there's a trail about a 1.5 mile long trail that circles along the rim of the crater, and you get very impressive views out over the landscape. Ubehebe Crater is part of a larger volcanic field, and then just looking down into the crater is very impressive. It's just it's colorful, it's deep, and it goes back to that whole point of how Death Valley recalibrates your sense of the size of the earth, because here it's relative to the rest of Death Valley, it's a relatively small feature, but when you're standing on the rim of it, it just looks enormous.
Great advice, Matt. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Matt Jaffe was a senior writer for Sunset Magazine for more than 20 years and still writes for the publication. You can find his prose in Los Angeles Magazine, the San Francisco Chronicle, Sierra Magazine, and many other outlets. And you can find links to all of the locations Matt mentioned today on our website, visitcalifornia.com/podcast. Thank you for listening to California Now. This podcast is produced by Visit California. I'm your host, Soterios Johnson. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Please subscribe. As you probably noticed, we took you on a bit of an audio tour of California this episode. Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, Carmel, Squaw Valley, Lake Tahoe, Death Valley. One thing I've learned since moving to the Golden State, you're never far away from an epic road trip. All you need is a tank of gas and some inspiration. To help you map out your next California dream drive, simply go to visitcalifornia.com and click on one of the itineraries waiting there for you.